might be called both clubs going at each other. Michael Jordan and Xavier McDaniel. Michael Jordan.
But most of the time he's been coming to the middle. This time.
If Michael Jordan had failed that night, there might be no Bulls dynasty, no three-peat, no GOAT debate. Because on May 17, 1992, everything hung by a thread. One loss, and everything we know about Jordan's legacy could have unraveled forever. The Knicks were ready for the moment. They had a roster that could handle it, and they were determined to make it happen, which meant the greatest player of all time was one game away from extinction. It's 1992. The Bulls had just won their first championship in franchise history the previous season. Michael had confirmed that he was the most dominant player in the world, and that no one could come close to him. However, they had only done it once. Michael needed to prove to the world that the Bulls were a future dynasty, when that was far from guaranteed. However, the 1992 playoffs were going to be extremely tough. Cleveland and Portland were able to put the Bulls on the ropes at times during the series, but there was one team that was able to push them to the limit, to a decisive Game 7. The New York Knicks were a real powerhouse. They had it all. They had their superstar Patrick Ewing, his sidekick enforcer Xavier McDaniel, their elite playmaker Mark Jackson, and their bench scorer John Starks. A roster that probably would have been champions if they hadn't had the misfortune of crossing paths with the greatest player in basketball history. After overcoming the enormous barrier of the Pistons, who had been the Bulls' nemesis for the last few seasons, the Eastern Conference was Chicago's to lose. In the season of their first ring in 1991, they had won 61 games. In 1992, they had won 67. Phil Jackson's Bulls were a team with a clear offensive identity. They were the most efficient team, and if that weren't enough, they were also one of the best defenses in the entire NBA. There wasn't much room to hurt them, but we all know that regular season numbers and records are worthless when May rolls around. The Knicks were hungry for revenge. After several seasons in limbo, unable to make deep playoff runs despite having one of the best players in the NBA in Patrick Ewing, they were finally finding consistency. But the problem was the Bulls. In 1991, when Chicago won its first ring, they swept the Knicks in the first round of the playoffs, 3-0. A resounding result that perhaps didn't do justice to the difference in quality between the two teams. But what it did do was make the Knicks players want to set the record straight. New York beat the aging Detroit Pistons in the first round of the 1992 playoffs. Their next opponent would be the winner of the series between the Bulls and the Heat. Logically, Chicago swept the Florida team, and now, the conference semifinals, the two teams would face each other in a completely even series. The Knicks made a statement by winning the first game against the Bulls with a 34-16 performance from Ewing. Chicago responded by winning the next two games with strong performances from MJ. From there, they split the wins until they reached Game 7. A game that, in a way, would decide the legacy of Jordan and the Bulls forever. That brings us to May 17, 1992, the date when the Chicago Stadium was reserved for the most important game of the season. More than 25,000 Bulls fans were in attendance to give Michael the boost he needed, the strength he needed to overcome a tough and scrappy team, because if he didn't, the Bulls were 48 minutes away from elimination. Michael Jordan knew it, and he showed it the first time he got the ball. With his force, he drove into the paint packed with Knicks players to draw the foul. The game had just started, and the atmosphere was absolutely crazy from the start. Just seconds later, Michael pressed full court to get an inbound steal that created an open look for John Paxson, who was unable to make it. This caused the Knicks to go on the other side of the court in transition, allowing Gerald Wilkins to get a fierce dunk that silenced the stands. However, the usual suspect would soon respond. Michael, from the low post, was able to knock down a midi in the face of his defender without even putting the ball on the floor. Jordan was already warming up, and he showed it every time he got the rock. Again, from the low post, he drained a fadeaway in the face of two defenders. And finally, the rest of the Bulls players started to get going. First with Pippen finding Horace Grant in the paint with a great pass for an easy dunk. And second with a basket in transition also by Scottie, where he was practically unstoppable. However, it was MJ's turn again. This time he switched sides, attacking from the right low block. And of course, he once again used his lethal fadeaway to knock down yet another midi. The man could score whenever he wanted from that spot, and no one could do anything to stop him. Right after that, Michael finally saw an opportunity to attack the paint after a brilliant spin move and scored another 2 points. Gerald Wilkins, his defender, was already having nightmares, and his night had only just begun. However, it seemed that the Knicks defense had not yet realized the gravity of the situation, because on the next play, Pippen finds Jordan open at the top of the key coming off a screen, and he of course drains the long two. The intensity of the game was evident from the first quarter. Scotty and Xavier McDaniel got into a brawl. However, the Knicks forward was used to this type of confrontation. He was an instigator. Not happy with that, he also went for Michael. Now Jordan had one more reason to run over the Knicks. McDaniel had made the worst mistake of his career. Pippen went for immediate revenge, but was fouled in the process. But it was Jordan, with his divine touch from mid-range, who first lit the fuse. He was pissed, and there was no turning back. Right after that, MJ attacked the Knicks paint again with an incredible jumper, in which he also drew the and one from Greg Anthony. Then, on a transition play, Pippen finally got the weight off his shoulders and slammed the ball fiercely into the Knicks basket. But the show had only just begun. Jordan continued to punish the Knicks from mid-range. In that game, he didn't even need to drive to the basket regularly. Just getting to his spots, 15 to 20 feet away from the basket, was enough. At that point in his career, there was already something that set Jordan apart from the best scorers of his generation. Because when you least expected it, he was capable of throwing a dime to a player who was alone after being guarded by multiple defenders. And of course, you could be sure that on the next play, if he got the ball, it was his turn. This time in transition from the left wing, he knocked down yet another mid-range jumper. The minutes kept ticking by, and the Knicks still couldn't find an answer for MJ, who was able to score over and over again every time he posted up. Even more so when he was being defended by the much smaller John Starks. The most incredible thing is that despite Jordan's offensive recital and Scottie Pippen's help, the Bulls were only leading by 5 points at halftime, and that was scary. If they were barely ahead with a legendary performance by the best player in the league in front of their fans, what would happen if Jordan cooled off? Well, as Kanye West once said, I guess we'll never know. Because in the second half, the Bulls put all their eggs in one basket. Jordan started by finding Pippen for an easy layup in transition. Then, after a missed shot by John Paxson, Michael was able to add 2 more points with a putback layup. Scoring, assisting, rebounding, it didn't matter. The man was doing everything on the court. Need defense? There's Jordan, blocking John Starks as he tried to knock down a long two. Need a bucket? Just say the word, because Michael, against double team or even triple team, was capable of anything. Look at how he handles himself between the defense, floating above the court and dodging skyscrapers like a bird in downtown Chicago. But that's not all. Moments later, Mike has time to steal the ball, lose it, and stop Xavier McDaniel in transition. He was everywhere. Now, when players like B.J. Armstrong are capable of drilling shots like this one, you know Chicago has the upper hand. However, Jordan's night was not over yet. The man kept delivering highlight after highlight, creating a reel that would be studied by every guard in the NBA for decades. The Bulls had broken the game open in the third quarter, going up by 15 points, but Michael was showing out. Not just to finish off the Knicks' chances, but to warn the teams the Bulls would face for the rest of the offseason of what was to come. Check out this incredible play, in which MJ spins baseline to finish with a reverse layup that looks like something out of a science fiction movie. But let's be honest, all the Bulls players stepped up in the second half to make up for Michael Jordan's superhuman effort. He was leading by example, doing everything, and that energy spread throughout the team. Even Pippen, still annoyed by Xavier McDaniel's taunting, was eager to show what he was capable of even with the game almost over. But what better way to cap off a historic night than with a basket from the low post by Jordan in the face of Patrick Ewing, who could only watch as Michael's jump seemed unreachable. However, this must not have sat well with the Knicks players, because moments later, the game almost erupted into a pitched battle. Fortunately, it didn't happen. But what did happen was Jordan's last basket to rub salt in the wound. With a great inbound pass from Scotty, Michael scored what would be the last points of the night, an incredible ending to a historic night. The Bulls beat the Knicks in Game 7, thanks to a stat line of 42 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, and 3 blocks from their leader. He filled every box-in-the-box score in one of the most complete nights of his career. That, added to Pippen's 17-point triple-double, made the victory unquestionable. And the Bulls didn't face any team that gave them as much trouble as the Knicks during the rest of the playoffs. Chicago faced Cleveland in the conference finals, where they beat them in 6 games. Finally, they beat the Blazers in the finals, also in 6 games. The Bulls won their second ring, and Michael Jordan was crowned Finals MVP for the second time in his career, ascending to the pantheon of league legends. However, the Knicks didn't give up. Patrick Ewing did everything for the Big Apple franchise and managed to qualify them for the finals after Jordan's retirement. Although, also in a Game 7, they were defeated by the Rockets. That team, despite having a great roster, would never win a ring. The reason, in part, was that they coincided in time and conference with the greatest player of all time. A player who, on nights like that in 1992, was capable of giving his all. Although Michael only had 2 rings, the Bulls became the team to beat. Because people weren't so afraid of what they achieved, they were afraid of what was yet to come. The outcome of his career allowed us to see the importance of those 48 minutes in his legacy. It allowed us to see how the Knicks had a golden opportunity to change the history of basketball forever. Because if he failed that night, we might not talk about Jordan the way we do today. So, in reality, that night the rest of the NBA realized something terrifying. Michael Jordan was inevitable. On the other hand, is that game the most complete night of Jordan's career? The night he was able to do everything for his team, in addition to scoring 40 points. Drop your GOAT moment in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. If you live for legendary breakdowns, epic rivalries, and the moments that made basketball history, subscribe to First 5 Hoops and join a community of real basketball fans. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with all our latest content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.